Welcome to MATCH B2B Insights. I'm Brenda, and today we're talking directly to small and mid-sized medtech and medical device companies, especially those 11 to 50-person teams selling into the US and abroad. If you're trying to build a predictable pipeline into hospitals, clinics, or through distributors, this one is for you. With me are three people who live this every day. Benny Fluman, founder and CEO of MATCH B2B, Daniel Weiss, our go-to-market and revenue infrastructure lead, and Brian Newman, who builds SDR engines that actually get you into conversations with real buyers. Benny, let's start with you. Why is it that even really innovative medtech companies still struggle to turn visibility into a predictable revenue system?
Because visibility is not a system. A lot of smaller medtech companies look at giants like Medtronic or Boston Scientific and think, if we just get more awareness, we'll be fine. But those giants don't win on awareness alone. They win on structure, their brand, their data, their clinical stories, their pricing logic, their sales motions. It's all aligned around a clear journey for each buyer type. The 20-30-person medtech company often has the opposite. Great technology, some conferences, some content, maybe a few champions, but no consistent way to move a lead from first contact to a closed deal in a repeatable, measurable way. That's the gap we see over and over.
And that gap gets even sharper when you look at who you're actually selling to. Roughly speaking, you've got three main buyer archetypes. First, hospitals and IDNs, complex systems with committees, procurement, IT, finance, clinical leadership. Second, clinics and physician groups, smaller, faster, more personal, but very sensitive to workflow and day-to-day disruption. Third, distributors and channel partners, where the buyer is someone who needs to resell your product and justify it to their own customers. Each of those requires a different journey, different proof, different messaging. The big players build specific paths for each. SMB medtech companies often try to push everyone through one generic funnel, and that's where deals slow down or die.
Yeah, and from the SDR side, when those journeys aren't clear, outreach turns into guesswork. One week we sound like we're selling to a surgeon, next week to a CFO, then to a distributor rep, using the same email template. It confuses the market and your own team. So in this episode, we're going to break down those buyer types, the real-world hospital and clinic journeys, and how to build something that a small team can actually run without pretending to be Medtronic.
Exactly. So if you're that 15, 30, 50-person medtech team in the US asking, how do we get serious about GTM without hiring 30 more people? Stay with us. Let's talk about how to treat marketing and sales as infrastructure, not just activity. So Benny, Daniel, before we dive into hospital politics and SDR plays, let's explain what we actually mean when we say MATCH B2B builds revenue infrastructure, not campaigns. And quick note for listeners, this podcast itself is produced on MATCH B2B's own AI-based system, the same infrastructure we use with clients to build authority content at scale. Benny, you want to ground that?
Sure. Most companies come to us saying, we need a campaign, we need leads, we need content. Our answer is, you don't just need more stuff, you need a system. We use AI as a backbone to design that system. How you define your ICPs, structure your buyer journeys, design outbound and inbound plays, and then create content that actually supports those steps. This podcast is a live example. We're using our AI infrastructure to plan the narrative, generate the format, and turn it into assets that build authority, without needing a 10-person content team. Same logic applies to your emails, your decks, your SDR scripts.
When we say AI as infrastructure, we don't mean play with ChatGPT and hope for the best. We mean very structured workflows. For a small medtech company, that might look like standardized research processes for accounts, AI-assisted drafting of hospital versus clinic messaging, automated routing of leads into the right sequences, and dashboards that show where each buyer type is stuck. The goal is to make a 20-person team act with the operational discipline of a 200-person commercial org, without pretending you have their budget or headcount.
And from my side, AI is baked into SDR execution, not bolted on. We use it to pre-structure account maps, draft first-pass outreach by persona, and log and summarize call notes so we can iterate messaging weekly. It's not magic, it's leverage. You still need clear strategy, tight ICPs, and real conversations.
Yeah, AI doesn't replace your GTM thinking. It amplifies it, if the structure is there. That's the lens for the rest of this episode. How do we design a revenue system for Medtech, and then use AI to run it with more consistency and less chaos?
Let's zoom out to the 2026 reality your buyers are living in. Healthcare is shifting more toward value-based care and outpatient settings. Procedures that used to be locked inside big hospitals are moving to ASCs and clinics. Companies like Shockwave Medical are good examples of those who grew by clearly articulating not just clinical impact, but economic impact, how they affect outcomes, procedure time, downstream costs. That's the bar now. If your messaging is only better device or cooler tech, you're not speaking the language of value analysis committees or CFOs.
And layered on top of that, you have the constraints. FDA rules, HIPAA, internal hospital procurement policies. You cannot talk like a pure SaaS startup, promising the world in your copy and throwing edgy claims on LinkedIn. Your buyers are risk-aware. They care about compliance, documentation, liability, patient safety. Even your case studies and testimonials need to be careful. So the question becomes, how do you still market with energy and clarity, but in a way that respects the regulatory and institutional reality?
This is where we see the big gap. Many smaller medtech players are stuck in feature marketing. They list specs, modes, AI algorithms, materials, while the leading players like Boston Scientific or Medtronic build narratives around outcomes and risk, clinical risk, operational risk, financial risk. They tell a story that connects data, workflow, and economics. And here's a hard truth. Most meta companies don't lose deals because the product is weak. They lose because their commercial system doesn't really exist. If you want to play in that world, even as a 30-person company, you have to move the conversation from what we built to what risk we reduce and what outcomes we improve within all the regulatory boundaries Brenda just mentioned.
And when we map outbound, we mirror that shift. The SDR email to a hospital service line leader is not about your algorithm. It's about a clinical and economic problem they recognize, framed in their language, with a credible path to evidence. That's a very different starting point than a generic, we're an innovative AI medtech company.
All right, let's formalize those 3 buyer archetypes. For most of the teams we work with, it's 1. Hospital systems and IDNs, 2. Clinics and physician groups, and 3. Distributors or channel partners. Same product, 3 very different journeys. Daniel, walk us through how decision-making actually looks when you compare those.
In big hospital systems, think Intuitive Surgical as a reference point. They navigate multi-stakeholder deals: surgeons, nursing leadership, biomed, IT, finance, purchasing committees. There's a whole internal change management process. In outpatient clinics, especially smaller ones, adoption can be faster. The owner-physician or a small leadership group makes a decision based on workflow fit, patient impact, and payer reality. Still sophisticated, but way less committee-driven. With distributors, you're dealing with a business that has its own portfolio, its own priorities, and limited mindshare. They care, can I sell this? Will it cannibalize something? Will it stick in my territory? 3 different logics.
And trying to run all 3 through the same funnel is a classic SMB mistake. You can't treat a hospital champion, a clinic owner, and a distributor rep as the same lead in the same HubSpot sequence. The successful companies segment by site of care and buyer type from day one. Different entry points, different content, different proof. The system around your product has to adapt, even if your internal team is tiny.
From an SDR angle, that means 3 sets of playbooks, not 30, but clearly distinct ones. Different research checklists, different first touch angles, different success metrics. If you blend them, reps lose focus and messaging turns into soup.
So, one company, 3 journeys. In the next chapters, we'll go one by one, starting with the most complex: hospitals and IDNs. Benny, give us a classic story. Small medtech company, strong technology, aiming at hospitals, and it just doesn't convert. What does that usually look like? Because from what you described, it sounds like a lot of teams think one excited surgeon automatically equals a deal.
Exactly, and that's where companies lose a year. We've seen this movie many times. Composite story: a 25-person medtech company with great clinical promise. They get early interest from a few enthusiastic physicians at a conference. The CEO hears, "I love this, we should use it," and mentally checks the box. We're in. They send a glossy deck, maybe a clinical paper, and then wait. Months pass, no decision. They completely underestimate the internal hospital process. Meanwhile, companies like Stryker or Shockwave Medical are arming their champions with structured clinical data, economic models, and procurement-ready materials. They're guiding the internal journey. The small company is just hoping that single excited surgeon will push it through the maze alone.
If we deconstruct the real journey, there are stages. First, you build a clinical champion. Then that champion has to convince peers and maybe a service line head. Then you hit a value analysis committee, where economic and operational questions dominate. Then IT and security if there's data involved. Finally, procurement negotiates terms. In our composite failure story, the company had assets for stage 1 only, convincing the doctor. No tools for value analysis, no standardized answers for IT, no clear pricing logic or contract structure for procurement. So the process stalls in the middle.
And the signals were there. SDRs heard things like, "We love it, but we need to take it to committee." That's not a win, that's the start of a new sale. Without a plan for that committee phase, those deals die quietly.
So the lesson is, if you're selling into hospitals, your marketing can't stop at awareness and a hero deck. You need a mapped internal journey and assets for each step, even if you're a small team. Brian, let's stay with hospitals and IDNs. How should SDR and outbound actually work here, especially for a small team that can't mimic Medtronic's army?
I'd structure it like a lightweight version of what the big players do. First, account selection. Pick a manageable set of target systems, not 500 hospitals. Then, stakeholder mapping. Who are the likely champions, influencers, and blockers? Clinicians, service line leads, possibly quality or population health, plus procurement later. Companies like Medtronic systematically map this. We just do it with more focus and AI help, not a huge field team. Then, sequences. For a hospital champion, my first email might be, "We're working with teams dealing with post-procedure complications in vascular surgery. In cases like complex peripheral interventions, they're looking for ways to reduce complication risk and procedure time by around 20 to 30%. Is this a priority for your service line this year?" No feature dump, no 20 claims. You're opening a problem-based conversation. Once you have interest, the SDR's job is to guide the next steps. Here's a one-page clinical summary you can share. Here's a short deck you can use internally. Here's how other hospitals navigated value analysis. Marketing has to supply these hospital-focused assets: clinical summaries, internal champion decks, FAQ sheets for procurement and IT. Outbound and content are one system, not 2 departments.
And the infrastructure layer matters. We track contacts not just as leads, but as roles in the hospital journey. Champion, committee member, procurement, IT. That gives you visibility into where deals are stuck and what content is missing.
So for hospitals, think narrow list, mapped stakeholders, problem-first outreach, and assets that help champions sell internally. That's how an SDR function becomes a strategic engine, not just a cold-calling team. Let's switch to clinics and physician groups. Smaller, often faster-moving, but with very different psychology. Brian, what changes compared to hospitals?
The big failure pattern is copy-pasting hospital messaging. Long committee-focused decks, heavy economics, very formal tone, sent to a busy clinic owner who's already running behind on patients. You miss the emotional and operational reality of their day. They're thinking, will this disrupt my schedule? will my staff actually use it? How does this affect reimbursement? Not, what will my value analysis committee say? Outbound here needs to be tighter and closer to daily workflow. For example, referencing companies like Axion Biosystems or Flow Neuroscience in their segments, you see how they speak directly to how clinicians work and the patient impact, not just the tech. We borrow that mindset. Emails that say, here's how practices like yours reduced X friction per day, or here's how this fits into a 15-minute consult without adding clicks.
Let me make this real with a quick story. We worked with a 28-person Medtech company selling into vascular clinics in the US. The tech was excellent. Every demo ended with, "This is amazing." But deals kept dying at the same point, 2 weeks after the demo. When we unpacked it, the issue wasn't the product, it was the journey. There was no simple way for the physician to explain the value to partners, no clear script for front desk staff, no cheat sheet for billing. Once we built a very simple 3-step path, physician story, staff workflow guide, reimbursement one-pager, suddenly those same clinics started moving from "this is cool" to signed pilots within a few weeks.
So, different speed, different psychology. Hospital playbooks don't just shrink. They need to be redesigned around workflow, emotion, and fast trust. Now, the third archetype, distributors and channel partners. A lot of founders hope this motion will solve GTM for them, and then get disappointed. Brian, why?
Classic story. A company signs a distributor, celebrates, and then basically goes dark. No real enablement, no clear targets, no joint planning. 6 months later, 0 meaningful sales. The assumption was, they know the market, they'll do the work. But from the distributor's side, they've got a full bag already. If you don't give them reasons and tools to prioritize you, you'll be forgotten.
Large distributors like Cardinal Health or Patterson companies are used to structured enablement from the big manufacturers, launch plans, training, co-marketing, joint forecasts. Even as a 20-person medtech company, you can adapt that logic in a lightweight way. Clear ICP definitions, simple sales stories, demo scripts, objection handling guides, shared dashboards.
And you treat them almost like an extended SDR and sales team. Regular check-ins, pipeline reviews, AI-assisted content they can customize, and accountability on both sides. Here are the 10 target accounts this quarter. Here's the sequence. Here's what we'll measure. That's very different from handing them a brochure and disappearing.
Exactly. A distributor motion is still a system you design. Someone else is selling, but you're responsible for the structure.
Let's put this into a single architecture. For a small medtech company, I'd start with 3 parallel but connected paths: hospital, clinic, distributor. Think of examples like Healthy.io or Ibex Medical Analytics. They built structured motions into hospitals and health systems, not just random deals. For each archetype, define entry points, core messages, key proof, and next step offers. Then align outbound SDR, inbound content, and your website around those.
On the marketing side, that means your website doesn't treat everyone the same. If I'm from a hospital, I should land on pages that talk about committees, evidence, and economic impact. If I'm from a clinic, I should see workflow, patient outcomes, and simple onboarding. Distributors should see partner value, enablement, and margin logic. Then outbound SDR, Brian's team, drives targeted traffic into those paths instead of sending everyone to the same generic homepage.
And my SDR sequences are built to support that. Hospital messaging links to hospital pages and assets. Same for clinics and distributors. Weekly, we review which steps get replies, which assets get used, and we adjust. It's one connected system, not separate marketing things and sales things.
The danger is the tool zoo. Buying every platform, every widget, and still lacking a coherent flow. The successful growth stage medtechs we look at don't have the most tools. They have a focus stack serving a clear architecture. CRM plus marketing automation, a content engine, SDR tooling, and AI as the connective tissue. That's enough if the strategy is disciplined.
Let's talk AI and content quality. A lot of teams are scared of flooding the market with generic, maybe even non-compliant material, what people call AI slop. How do we avoid that while still using AI as leverage?
The difference is between random AI usage and a governed operating layer. In Medtech especially, you can't just let anyone generate claims. Look at companies like Ibex Medical Analytics. They operate in clinically sensitive environments, so AI is used in a highly controlled way. For GTM, that means clear rules on what AI can draft, who reviews it, and what data it can or cannot touch. AI drafts within guardrails. Humans validate for clinical and regulatory accuracy.
And this is where a lot of founders get confused about AI. They either ignore it completely or expect it to magically fix a broken GTM. We don't use AI as a trick, we use it as structure. One MedTech client of ours used AI to generate 40 hospital-specific committee briefs in 2 weeks, something that would normally take a quarter. Same content backbone, but adapted to different hospitals, decision makers, and objections. That's AI as infrastructure, not AI as noise.
On the SDR side, AI helps draft persona-specific outreach. One path for a hospital service line head, another for a clinic owner, another for a distributor manager, always anchored in approved messaging blocks. It also helps build nurture series and call summaries so we can personalize at scale without going off script or off label.
So AI isn't there to replace your regulatory brain. It's there to multiply the impact of a clear, compliant story across all the touchpoints we've been talking about. Brian, let's get super tactical. A 30-person medtech company is listening and wants to fix SDR and outbound in the next 60 days. What does your concrete toolkit look like by buyer type?
If you're listening to this as a founder or head of commercial, here's exactly how I'd structure your next 60 days. Week 1 to 2, I'd focus on clarity and lists. Who are your hospital targets? Who are your clinic targets? Who are your distributor or channel targets? Not everyone, your top 30 to 50 realistic accounts. Get that into the CRM cleanly. Week 3 to 4, I'd build one outbound sequence per archetype, not 10. One for hospitals, one for clinics, one for distributors, with 3 or 4 core messages each that we can test. Then weeks 5 to 8, it's execution and learning. SDRs run the sequences, marketing supports with content, and every week we look at opens, replies, meetings, and objections by archetype. You don't need a huge team for this. You need focus and discipline.
So in 60 days, you're not done, but you have a living SDR engine, segmented by buyer type, and a rhythm of improvement that doesn't depend on guesswork.
If you open your dashboard right now and can't see hospitals, clinics, and distributors separately, that's your first red flag. You don't need 50 KPIs. You need a handful by archetype. For example, outreach volume, meaningful conversations, and qualified opportunities per week for each of the 3. Then, over a quarter, you want to see which archetype is actually moving and where deals are stalling. That's when metrics start to tell you where to invest more and where to simplify or stop.
And the interesting thing is that the big medtech players didn't start with perfect systems either. They built them step by step as they grew. The difference is they committed to the system early. Small teams can do the same, just with fewer moving parts. So, your 90-day plan doesn't need to look like Boston Scientific's. It needs to be simple, realistic, and actually used. Clear archetypes, map journeys, one focused campaign per archetype, and the discipline to review it every week.
And remember, this podcast itself is running on MATCH B2B's AI infrastructure, the same kind of system we use to help companies like yours create structured, authority-building content without drowning your team. If you're running a 20 or 40-person medtech company and your pipeline still feels random, it's probably not a marketing problem. It's a system problem. And systems can be built. I'd invite you to look at your commercial engine through the lens we shared today. 3 buyer archetypes, 3 journeys, 1 coherent system.
Yeah, and if your SDR motion today feels random or tiring, that's usually a system issue, not a people issue. Fix the structure and the conversations get a lot better, a lot faster.
And as you think about AI, treat it as an operating layer that enforces discipline, not a toy. Small medtech teams can absolutely act with big company rigor if the workflows are clear.
At MATCH B2B, that's exactly what we're obsessed with. Aligning brand, demand, sales, and revenue models so growth becomes predictable, not accidental. This episode is just the starting point. We'll keep on real cases and concrete frameworks in future episodes.
Benny, Daniel, Brian, thank you. And thanks to all of you for listening to MATCH B2B Insights. If this sparked questions about your own GTM system, keep an eye out for upcoming episodes where we'll go deeper into specific plays and examples. Until next time, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.
Talk soon.
Thanks for listening.
Talk soon.